Children were smaller and more nimble, and so therefore could perform functions that would be more difficult for adults. In addition, it was more difficult for children to unionize, and employers could pay them lower wages than they had to pay adults.
Over 100 years ago, three women stood together for a photo that seemed ordinary, until scientists zoomed in a century later and uncovered shocking details no one expected. What secrets were hidden in this silent image? This discovery has stunned experts and changed the way we see history. Get ready to uncover a mystery that bridges the past and present in the most surprising way. The rise of textile mills in North Carolina. In the final decades of the 19th century, North Carolina was changing rapidly. What was once a land of rolling farmlands and quiet towns was now beginning to echo with the sounds of progress. Across the state, textile mills were rising, built of red brick and powered by steam and ambition. The Industrial Revolution had made its way south, and North Carolina was eager to catch up with the growing demand for mass-produced goods. Cotton had always been a key part of the Southern economy, but now, instead of shipping raw cotton to the north, it was being spun, dyed, and woven into fabric right at home. This marked the beginning of a major economic shift and the birth of a new way of life for thousands of families. By the turn of the 20th century, textile mills were scattered across the Piedmont region of North Carolina, becoming the heartbeat of many small towns. Gastonia, a town in Gaston County, quickly rose to prominence. What was once a small, quiet community became one of the most important mill towns in the entire state. Its streets filled with the footsteps of workers, the whistles of trains carrying goods, and the constant mechanical hum of mill machinery. It was a time of hope and expansion, where factories brought with them jobs, housing, and an entirely new identity for the community. At the center of Gastonia's transformation stood the Gastonian Mill. It was not the only mill in town, but it was one of the largest and most active. With its towering structure and rows of large windows, the mill looked like a fortress of industry. Inside, the rooms were filled with spinning machines and weaving looms, all operated by hand and muscle. The air smelled of cotton and oil, and the floors vibrated under the weight of non-stop labor. The Gastonian Mill represented a dream for many, a chance at a steady wage, a roof over one's head, and a way to break free from the unpredictability of farming life. People came from all over the countryside to work in mills like this. Farmers left behind their fields, and families packed their belongings into wagons and moved into company-owned mill villages. These villages were built close to the mills, offering small homes, general stores, and sometimes even schools and churches. Life in a mill village was tightly tied to the factory. Rent was often deducted from paychecks, and the mill owners had control over most aspects of workers' lives. Despite this, many families chose this life because it offered regular work at a time when economic stability was rare. The economic conditions that fueled this migration to mill towns were rooted in poverty and uncertainty. Farming in North Carolina was becoming increasingly difficult. Crops failed, prices dropped, and debts mounted. The promise of earning cash each week drew people to the mills like moths to a flame. The work was grueling, but for those with few other options, it was a lifeline. In these tight-knit mill communities, work was a family affair. Every able-bodied member of the household contributed, and households often depended on multiple incomes to get by. It was not uncommon for children to be among the workers. The social conditions of the time did not view child labor through the same moral lens we do today. Instead, it was considered practical. Many families needed every bit of income they could get, and the mills saw children as a source of cheap, manageable labor. Children were quick, could reach into the tight spaces between machines, and were generally obedient. While some reformers raised concerns, laws were weak, and enforcement was even weaker. In many towns, it was simply accepted as part of the way things were. In 1912, the Gastonian mill was operating at full capacity. The factory floor was alive with motion and noise from dawn until dusk. Workers toiled for 10 to 12 hours a day, often 6 days a week. There were no safety nets, and injuries were frequent. Fingers caught in machines, backs strained from lifting, and lungs filled with cotton dust were part of everyday life. Yet, people kept coming. The mill was a symbol of hope as much as it was of hardship. It gave people purpose, community, and a paycheck, even if the cost was high. That year, Gastonia was at the peak of its industrial rise. The town had grown rapidly, and with it, the demands on the workforce increased. The Gastonian mill stood as a reminder of how far North Carolina had come in a short span of time. The brick walls of the mill bore witness to both the progress of the industrial boom and the sacrifices of those who powered it. While the machines hummed and the looms turned cotton into cloth, the human cost of that progress quietly added up. A cost no one imagined would be paid by the smallest, most fragile hands among them. Child labor in the early 1900s. It was a time of change, with machines beginning to replace traditional ways of life. But while this industrial growth brought opportunity, it also created new hardships, especially for children. In many mill towns, children as young as 7 became part of the workforce, joining their parents in long, tiring days at the mill. For struggling families, every penny counted. Parents often found that their wages alone weren't enough to support everyone, especially when rent, food, and basic necessities added up quickly. Because of this, children were sent to work. Their income, though small, was essential. This wasn't seen as unusual or cruel. It was simply the way things were. Many people accepted it as a necessary part of life. Some even believed it taught children discipline and responsibility. But the reality for those children was far from simple. Inside the mills, the environment was loud, dusty, and dangerous. The air was thick with cotton fibers, and the sound of machines filled every corner. Children were assigned tasks that involved constantly moving between machines, picking up fallen threads, and fixing small mechanical issues. Their small size made it easier for them to reach into tight spaces where adults couldn't fit. Unfortunately, this also placed them at great risk. Accidents were common. A moment's distraction could lead to a crushed finger or worse. Safety precautions were minimal, and injuries often went untreated. The hours were long and grueling. Children worked 10 to 12 hours a day, often 6 days a week. Breaks were short, and standing all day took a serious toll on their growing bodies. Many suffered from chronic fatigue, back pain, and breathing problems. The constant exposure to cotton dust led to frequent coughing, sore throats, and lung issues. It was not unusual for children to collapse from exhaustion, only to be sent back to work the next day. There was little time for anything beyond work. After long shifts, children returned home too tired to play or even eat properly. Their world revolved around the mill. There were no weekends spent with friends or days filled with learning. Education was a luxury most could not afford. Some might have started school at a young age, but the demands of work usually forced them to leave early. Once they began working, returning to school became almost impossible. Over time, many forgot what it was like to sit in a classroom at all. The mental and emotional effects of this life were just as serious. At an age when children should have been curious and full of life, many were instead quiet, obedient, and worn down. They learned early that their value came from how much they could produce and how quietly they could follow orders. Speaking up or making mistakes brought harsh consequences. The factory taught them to stay silent, work hard, and never slow down. Over the years, this shaped how they saw themselves and their place in the world. Many children who started working in the mills stayed there into adulthood. With little education and few other options, they continued working the same jobs for decades. Their childhoods were lost to the rhythm of machines, and their futures were limited by the very system that had claimed their youth. It became a cycle that was hard to break. Parents who had worked in mills saw no other path for their own children. Reformers, journalists, and photographers started to document what was happening inside factories. Photos of small children with tired eyes and dust-covered faces began to appear in newspapers and reports. Let's take you back to the powerful work of the most well-known photographer of that time, whose lens captured the untold stories hidden behind factory walls. Louis Hines' Photographic Documentation. Louis Hines was trained as a sociologist and teacher, but he saw photography as a powerful tool for change. He understood that numbers and reports could be overlooked or forgotten, but a single image of a weary child standing in front of a towering machine could stir emotions and raise questions. He worked for the National Child Labor Committee, an organization determined to end the exploitation of children in America's growing industries. With quiet determination and a deep sense of purpose, Hines traveled across the country, visiting factories, mines, farms, and mills where children worked long hours under tough conditions. One of the places Hines visited was Gastonia, a small but bustling mill town in North Carolina. In Gastonia, Hines took careful note of everything he saw. He observed children who were barely tall enough to reach the machines, their faces serious and tired despite their young age. He spoke to them, gently asking questions about their names, ages, and how long they had been working. Many had started when they were only 6 or 7 years old. Some had been working for years by the time Hines met them. These weren't rare cases. They were common. Children made up a large portion of the workforce in many of these mills. In another interview, Hines noted 2 girls, perhaps 10 and 12, working side by side. Asked them how many hours they work. "We come in before it gets light," the older one said, "and we leave when it's dark again." Both looked tired. Both smiled when asked if they liked working here, but then quickly looked away. Using his camera, Hines documented their daily lives. He captured the details others overlooked: the worn-out clothes, the bare feet, the strained expressions. He noticed how some of the children tried to appear strong and proud, while others seemed confused or even frightened. He never used the camera to shame or judge them. Instead, he used it to tell their stories, hoping that people in other parts of the country would see what was happening and begin to care. Through his work, these children, who had once been invisible to society, were finally seen. In a rare published statement, Louis Hines wrote, "Perhaps you are weary of child labor pictures. Well, so are the children. But someone must cry out the conditions which turn children into laborers too soon, which rob them of play, school, and health." That one line, "So are the children," carried the weight of the entire movement. Hines' photographs from Gastonia became some of the most talked-about images in the movement to end child labor. His work helped change public opinion. People who had never stepped inside a mill now had a clear picture of what life was like for young workers. Politicians, educators, and social reformers began to push for stronger laws and better protection for children. Hines' efforts did not lead to immediate change, but they sparked conversations that had long been avoided. Looking back, it's easy to see Louis Hines as a hero, but in his time, he was just a quiet man with a camera, a notebook, and a mission. He believed that truth could change hearts. He believed that children deserved more than 12-hour workdays and aching bones. And most of all, he believed that once people saw the truth, they could no longer look away. Let's tell you about a rare photograph captured by Louis Hines, one that stands apart from all his others and holds a story unlike any you've seen before. The photograph of Pearl, Viola, and Penelope. In 1912, Louis Hines captured a rare photograph of 3 young women, Pearl, Viola, and Penelope. The image shows them standing together inside the Gastonian mill in North Carolina, where they worked. The photo is simple but deeply moving. It freezes a moment in time when these young women, who had spent years in the mill since childhood, posed quietly for the camera. Their expressions, clothes, and stance speak volumes about their lives, their struggles, and the era they lived in. This photograph is more than just a picture. It is a window into the world of many young female mill workers in the early 1900s. Pearl, Viola, and Penelope were part of a generation of young women who worked long hours in textile mills across North Carolina. These mills were loud, dusty, and exhausting places where families relied on every member to contribute financially. The work was hard and often dangerous. Many of the girls started working when they were only children, some as young as 7 or 8 years old. By the time Hines took this photo, these three had already spent years surrounded by the noise of machines and the heavy cotton dust that filled the air. Their poses in the photograph reflect the quiet strength and resilience they had developed over the years. Yet, there is also a softness in their eyes that hints at their youth and the difficult realities they faced. This photograph symbolizes the shared experience of countless young female mill workers of the time. It captures not only their presence, but also the burdens they carried. Many girls like Pearl, Viola, and Penelope balanced the demands of mill work with limited education, poor health, and the pressure to support their families. The photo is a silent testament to their courage and the sacrifices they made in an era when childhood was often cut short by the demands of survival. One harsh reality of mill life was illness. The dusty and crowded conditions made workers especially vulnerable to diseases. Among these, tuberculosis was common and particularly deadly. Tuberculosis, often called consumption at the time, attacked the lungs and spread easily in places like textile mills. It caused a persistent cough, fatigue, weight loss, and sometimes severe breathing difficulties. Many young workers fell ill with tuberculosis, and medical treatment options were limited. The disease slowly weakened bodies and cut short many young lives. This photo, which seemed ordinary when it was taken, was rediscovered nearly a century later, and when scientists zoomed in, they uncovered strange details that shocked everyone. Rediscovery and scientific analysis. Almost 100 years after it was taken, the photograph of Pearl, Viola, and Penelope was rediscovered, sparking new interest and curiosity among scientists and historians alike. What once seemed like a simple, ordinary picture of three young women at work in a textile mill suddenly became a powerful source of insight into the lives and conditions of early 20th century mill workers. The rediscovery of this image happened as historians were combing through old archives, seeking to understand more about industrial history and the human stories behind it. Using modern technology, this old photograph could now be examined in ways that were never possible before. When the photograph came to light again, the scientific community reacted with a mix of fascination and surprise. Experts from various fields, including history, medicine, and anthropology, showed great interest. The photo was not just seen as a historical artifact, but as a piece of evidence offering clues about the harsh realities of life in textile mills. Researchers realized that by closely analyzing such images, they could uncover details about the people who lived through those times, their health, their clothing, and even the environment in which they worked. Thanks to advances in technology, scientists could zoom in on the photograph with incredible precision. Digital magnification tools allowed them to study facial features, skin texture, and posture in a way that was impossible a century ago. By closely observing these details, experts could make educated guesses about the health and living conditions of the women pictured. They noticed subtle signs that suggested the young women, especially one among them, were suffering from tuberculosis, a common and deadly disease during that era, especially among mill workers. Tuberculosis was widespread in industrial areas like Gastonia because the factory environment was harsh and unhealthy. The mills were filled with cotton dust, and the workspaces were crowded and poorly ventilated. This combination created a perfect breeding ground for respiratory diseases. Tuberculosis, which attacks the lungs, was particularly common among children and young adults working in such conditions. The disease caused symptoms like pale skin, persistent coughing, and a weary or weakened appearance. When analyzing the photograph, scientists focused on these subtle indicators. They looked at the girls' faces for signs of pallor or fatigue, which could suggest poor health. One girl's face appeared paler than the others, and her posture seemed weaker and more tired. Experts also noticed dark circles under her eyes and a slight drooping in her expression, both possible signs of illness. These observations, combined with historical knowledge about the prevalence of tuberculosis in textile mills, helped researchers conclude that at least one of the girls was likely affected by this disease. Besides health indicators, the photograph also offered insight into the working conditions of the time. The girls' clothing showed signs of wear, but was neatly kept, suggesting a pride in their appearance despite difficult circumstances. Their hair was tied back, likely for safety reasons, as working near machines required caution to avoid accidents. These small details provided clues about the daily lives of mill workers and the challenges they faced balancing work, health, and personal dignity. The rediscovery and analysis of this photograph demonstrate how modern technology can breathe new life into old images. What was once a simple moment frozen in time has now become a valuable historical record, shedding light on the experiences of young workers who often went unnoticed. This kind of scientific study allows us to connect with the past on a more personal level, revealing the human stories behind dusty archives and faded photographs. The rediscovery of the photograph and the harsh reality it revealed carried broader implications that no one had ever imagined. The broader implications of child labor documentation. The rediscovery of old photographs showing child labor in textile mills did more than just tell forgotten stories. These images played an important role in bringing attention to the harsh realities faced by children working in factories. Over time, photographic evidence became a powerful tool that helped push for major changes in labor laws, especially those protecting children. The pictures showed the world what life was really like for young workers and made it harder for society to ignore their suffering. This shift in public perception was critical in driving social reform. These photographs helped change public opinion. As more people saw the images, they began to question whether it was right for children to work in such conditions. Newspapers and magazines published these pictures, spreading awareness widely. People who had never seen a mill or factory firsthand were suddenly confronted with the realities of child labor. This growing concern led to demands for government action and stricter regulations to protect children. In the United States, these efforts resulted in important labor reforms. One of the earliest changes was the introduction of child labor laws that set minimum ages for work and limited the number of hours children could spend on the job. The Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 was a landmark law that helped to end most forms of child labor in the country. It established a minimum working age of 14 for non-agricultural jobs and limited working hours for teenagers. This law was built on decades of advocacy and evidence, including photographic documentation, that highlighted the need for change. North Carolina, where textile mills were widespread, saw similar reforms. The state had a large number of child workers in its mills and factories. In the early 1900s, local laws began to set minimum working ages and regulate hours, but enforcement was often weak. The photos taken by Hines and others brought greater scrutiny to these practices. Public pressure grew for better enforcement and stronger protections. Over time, North Carolina adopted stricter child labor laws, following the lead of federal reforms. Schools and child welfare organizations also became more active in campaigning against child labor and promoting education for young people. Internationally, the issue of child labor gained attention as well. Organizations such as the International Labor Organization, founded in 1919, worked to promote better working conditions and end child labor worldwide. The ILO developed conventions that set standards for the minimum age of employment and aimed to eliminate the worst forms of child labor. These international efforts helped influence policies in many countries, encouraging governments to protect children's rights and provide access to education. Photographic evidence, like the image of Pearl, Viola, and Penelope, played a part in these global movements. It helped put a human face on statistics and reports, making the problem more real and urgent. Images of young workers in harsh conditions appeared in international reports, meetings, and campaigns, strengthening the call for change. As a result, many countries introduced laws to restrict child labor and improve working conditions. Today, child labor laws are a basic part of labor policy in most countries. The progress made is thanks in large part to the early documentation and advocacy efforts that exposed the truth about working children. However, child labor still exists in some parts of the world, and the lessons from the past remind us of the importance of vigilance and continued efforts to protect vulnerable workers. Despite laws, reforms, and growing awareness, child labor still continues in some parts of the world today. Let's tell you about those horrible places where this harsh reality still exists. Ongoing curse of child labor. Even though child labor laws exist in many countries, the harsh reality is that child labor is still very much alive in parts of the world today. It is heartbreaking to know that millions of children, who should be spending their time learning, playing, and growing in safe environments, are instead forced to work in difficult and dangerous conditions. This ongoing curse of child labor continues to rob children of their childhood, health, and future. In the United States, child labor has not been completely eliminated. While most people think it is a problem of the past, some regions, especially in rural America, still see children working long hours in agriculture. States like Texas, California, and Florida have large farming industries where children are often found working in the fields. These kids pick fruits and vegetables under the hot sun, sometimes for more than 10 hours a day. The work is exhausting and physically demanding, and often involves the use of sharp tools or heavy machinery. Exposure to pesticides and other chemicals makes the situation even more dangerous. These children face real risks of injury and illness, yet many have little choice because their families rely on their income for survival. Beyond America, the problem is even more widespread and devastating. In many parts of the world, child labor remains a daily reality for millions of children. In countries across Africa, South Asia, and Latin America, children work in some of the most dangerous and exploitative industries. Mining is one such example, where children work deep underground or in open mines to dig for precious minerals. This work exposes them to dust, toxic chemicals, and the risk of accidents that can cause permanent injuries or even death. Many of these children work without any protective gear, putting their health at severe risk. In factories and workshops, children often work long hours in cramped, poorly ventilated spaces. They handle dangerous machines and chemicals that damage their lungs and skin. Many suffer from respiratory diseases, skin conditions, and weakened immune systems because of the harsh environment. These conditions often go untreated due to lack of access to proper medical care. The physical toll on these young workers is heartbreaking, and it affects their ability to grow into healthy adults. In some regions, child labor takes place in homes where children are forced to work as domestic servants. These children face abuse, neglect, and isolation. They often live away from their families and are denied the chance to attend school or have any kind of childhood. The emotional and psychological effects of this kind of labor are deeply damaging and can last a lifetime. The emotional pain of losing a childhood is difficult to imagine. Children who work instead of going to school miss out on the chance to learn, dream, and build a future. They often feel trapped in a cycle of poverty and hardship, with little hope for change. Families sometimes see child labor as the only way to survive, not realizing the long-term harm it causes. The global community has made progress in reducing child labor, but there is still much work to do. International organizations, governments, and activists continue to fight against child labor. They work to raise awareness, improve laws, and provide education and support to vulnerable families. Programs that offer schooling and financial assistance help give children a chance to leave labor behind and build a better future. Despite these efforts, the problem remains deeply rooted in poverty and lack of opportunity. The ongoing curse of child labor is not just a distant problem, it is a reality that affects millions of children right now. Their pain, struggles, and lost potential call for our attention and action. We must continue to raise our voices and work together until every child can enjoy the simple joys of childhood, grow up healthy, and have the chance to fulfill their dreams. Only then can we truly say that the fight against child labor has been won. What are your thoughts on the latest technology that zoomed into the photo and revealed surprising details? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to click the card on the screen for more.